I could quite happily talk about this for 4 or 5 days straight without drawing breath. So I'm going to attempt to hold myself to about 30 minutes and try and leave 15 minutes for questions at the end. I'm pretty sure on a 45-minute schedule. So if we're all cool with that, as we saw in the housekeeping, we will throw questions into the chat room at any time. I'll probably answer the questions all at the end, but if something catches my eye on the way through and I'm able to slip it in, we will try and do that. So bear in mind, I cannot see any of your faces. I can only see the screen. So the chat room is the way to communicate through. So that'll all be cool. Now, do I progress them, or do I just say, put it through the next slide, please, and magic happens? So look, just a bit of background. Container deposit scheme, and looking around the room as I was just before, a few of you may remember the times when you could take your Coke bottle back to the milk bar and get 10 cents back, or 5 cents back, or a penny, or whatever it was. The Victorian government will introduce a container deposit scheme in 2023. And we're going through the process where the government is figuring out what that will look like, how it will work, and who's going to participate in it. And we're going to talk about how this might work. At its most simple, as a consumer, it's pretty straightforward. You purchase a drink in a bottle or can. You have an empty container which you return somewhere, and we'll talk a bit about where somewhere is. Get 10 cents back, and the container goes off to be recycled. And the government's core objectives are around increasing the amount of recycling, as well as reducing litter. It uses all sorts of lofty language about a circular economy, but that's the core of it, and running from there. If we could move, so just talking a bit further about that, containers in this context, here is typically aluminium cans, steel cans, typically we're talking here about drink containers. It will include milk containers, both in terms of the PET style, as well as Tetra Paks. So even little Yakult bottles, I think, will come under the scheme. It's worth noting that wine bottles will be excluded from the scheme, but obviously beer bottles and beer cans will be inside the scheme. This aligns with schemes that are running in every other state. Victoria will be the last state in Australia to implement this, and runs from there. Perhaps if we go to the next slide. So there's going to be some language kicking around, because as a consumer, this is easy, but if you're going to be part of the system, it gets a little bit more complex, and that's what we want to talk about. As a consumer, following the green arrows, you're taking your can to a refund point operator, and you will get 10 cents back. That refund point operator will pass the can on to a network operator, and we'll get over 10 cents back, probably order of magnitude around 16 cents back for their work, for their labour. So the trick here now is, what is a refund point operator? A refund point operator, not just here in Victoria, but nationally, can have a couple of different things. But the refund point operators are effectively controlled or managed or subcontracted, if you like, to the network operators. And the network operators, Victoria is going to have 6 parts to the state, 3 metro, 3 non-metro zones across the state. And network operators will be bidding to the government to run the whole recycling operation for one or more of those zones. Network operators will then engage refund point operators to front the consumer, in effect. Refund point operators may be a reverse vending machine, in other words, like a reverse ATM at the supermarket, where you walk up to a machine, post your can in, 10 cents comes out, or more likely 10 cents is credited to an account. Refund point operators might also be a bag drop. For example, in effect, a sophisticated cage, maybe this half the size, like the size of a 20-foot shipping container, where consumers can collect their cans, put them in a bottle, a bag, have a label printed with their details on it, stick it on the bag, And then a couple of days later, all of those cans and bottles are sorted and a refund is generated. A refund point operator might also run a depot, which is a sort of a drive-through depot where people bring a bootload of cans or a trail load of cans, drive in, someone will sort them on the spot, and will hand them cash or a credit on the spot. So you can see we're getting from sort of small volumes through medium volumes through large volumes. But refund is the key point. These are organisations and events where a refund is generated on the spot. If we go to the next slide. At the same time, of course, your local council has a bin sitting in your house, picked up once a week, and the council is also currently collecting all of these cans and bottles. Council is keen to make sure that the network operators work with them, and that those bottles and cans that are 10 cents comes back to the local council, or maybe back to their subcontractor. So in broad terms, we'll see that the councils are part of the overall recycling scheme, and they will be keen to reduce their overall costs. If we move through to the next slide, there's also a concept called donation point. And a donation point is where certainly we see Scouts becoming involved. In essence, and a lot of our groups are doing this already. I was talking the other day to our friends, our group out at Mildura, who, even though they're in Victoria, have been collecting cans and bottles in Victoria and then once a month sticking them in a trailer, driving them across the border to New South Wales and cashing them in. A donation point is where a group might allow its friends and families to bring in bottles and cans, stick them in a specific bin. So I just got a note here that David Nathan is saying there's no PowerPoint showing. Is everybody else able to see the PowerPoint? Can anybody perhaps type a message?
I can see it.
Right, so it's David's problem. Thank you, David. So you might find one of the ways for Scout groups to participate in this will be to collect bottles and cans. It's not quite the bottle drives of 30 or 40 years ago that some of us remember, but to allow that. Groups may also participate, for example, by running some sort of special event. They might say, look, for the next month, please bring all your bottles and cans to the Scout Hall. You know, we're running a special drive for a special effort. Or you might contract with a local major event to say, we will do all the recycling for that event and collect all of the cans and bottles from that local festival or show. And then have them taken off to a refund point and collect your 10 cents per item. Scouting is also looking at, as you can see in the middle, setting up as a refund point operator or multiple sites. And these are some of the decisions that we're working through. There we go. 5th Mildura Scout Group is running a smuggling operation for cans and things across the border. So we are looking at Scouts Victoria level in terms of whether we create some depots. Depots in this context we've seen operate in South Australia, where our South Australian cousins, Scouts South Australia, runs about 10 depots. They have a fairly major business in recycling. People drive to those depots with their bootload of cans and cash them in. And Scouts in South Australia has been able to turn a profit for quite some years. I'm going to say 40 years. It's certainly in excess of 30 years. So we're examining their business model. We're examining how it might work here. We've noted that Scouts West Australia similarly has just set up an operation because the Western Australian government is about 18 months ahead of the Victorian government, and probably 2 or 3 years ahead of the Victorian government. And Scouts Western Australia has set up 4 depots in that way. So we get 2 possible ways that Scouting might become involved in recycling at a group level and at the depot level. We'll stretch some of that. We'll talk about those in a bit more depth in a second, but The two things are mutually exclusive. We can be in the donation point business. Scout groups can be participating on an opt-in basis. And we don't have to be a refund point operator for that to occur. We would just simply send our bottles and cans to some other refund point operator quite happily. And we'd typically arrange for them to pick up the bins and sort them and emptying them. Refund point operators are where the sorting and the counting occurs. So there's a comment in the questions about bag drops and bits and pieces. These would be no-touch operations. In other words, the refund point operator would pick up the bin full of bags. They would be responsible for the sorting and those sorts of things. I'm sure you can understand there's a lot of industrial risk. You're dealing with bottles and cans and potentially broken and sharp objects and forklifts and all those sorts of things. So quite an interesting challenge. It's also likely that groups can participate in things like the reverse vending machines. As you remember, I said earlier, this was effectively like an ATM style operation, maybe sitting in the car park of the supermarket. There will be a provision within those reverse vending machines for somebody sticking in their bottles or cans down the chute to say, no, don't give me the cash, please donate it to this entity, and they can select an entity from a pull-down menu. So we'd be keen to make sure that the local Scout group is listed as an entity, so people can stick their bottles and cans straight into the reverse vending machine and say, give my 50 cents worth of bottles to my local Scout group. We want to do that on both a local level as well as a statewide level for people who don't have access to a local Scout group or don't have an allegiance to a local Scout group. But we're very keen that Scout groups are able to participate in that way. Can I go to the next slide, please? So as I've been saying, group participation will be probably about bins of some sort at the hall, where we've seen this operate in South Australia. In some cases, it's just like the large wheelie bins that you've got at home. You might have 2 or 3 of those. You might have a chute going into one of them. People just stick their cans and bottles down the chute and walk away. When all the bins are full, then you ring the refund operator, and they come and pick up the bins and replace them with empty ones, kind of approach. They take them away, count them, and send you a credit. Just got a comment here from Sheridan. The operation you're describing is not the operation as it will run in Victoria. So you're not required to sort at a deposit collection base, but it runs from there. So we're aiming to, if we can set this up with bins at the hall, we want to keep it no touch. You don't want kids and parents rummaging through bins full of broken glass. I think that's certainly what Sheridan at Fifth Mildura is saying, that there is some risk in that. We don't want that to occur. But currently, all of the feedback we're getting is that that won't be the case. We also can run special collections. Maybe we can set up bins. And sorry, just to stick with bins at the hall, we believe that Scouts Victoria can assist, certainly by negotiating some opt-in contracts, so that we have a common sort of terms and conditions for people who are participating. We also think there's an option here to provide signage and marketing. In reality, this is a marketing game. You've got to convince, well, it's easier to convince parents and friends of the local Scout group to participate. Ideally, you want your neighbours to also be sending their bottles and cans down, and you're in competition with the council to some extent, because it's easy just to walk outside your back door and throw them in the council bin. Or there'll be no shortage of people who are saying, hey, look, donate your cans and bottles to me. A lot of other not-for-profit organisations, a lot of other charities are looking to get involved. Engaging with your local special events will be all about local groups and their relationship with their local agricultural show or local music festival and those sort of things. And we anticipate, as we've seen in other places, groups running an event where they go that and make that running from there. There is a third dot point there. We are in very early discussions with some of the potential network operators about offering groups the ability to host remember I talked about that 20-foot container. I don't know what the final configuration is, but go with that. Small container. No, sorry, not 20-foot, a 10-foot container. 20-foot's half a container. This is half a container. Some sort of container on their property where people can lodge their cans and bottles in a bag. We would anticipate that the local group, if they've got the capacity to do this, should be able to either get a return on the rental space. In other words, they're renting a bit of their land to somebody else, as well as obviously if people throw bottles and cans in, possibly without a bag, then they will be taken as donations to the local group. So you wouldn't need to have separate bins. That's very early stages, but we're looking to see if that's viable. It won't suit all groups because not all groups have the space nor the desire. And in case you missed the point, I have said about 3 times, we look at this as being an opt-in process. This will be about local groups making their own decisions on what they want to do. If I can go to the next slide, please. A lot of the work that's occurring at a state level at the moment is whether we set up depots. This requires us to make a pretty big decision. We would have to run it as a business. In other words, if we're going to set up a couple of depots, and we wouldn't do it for one, it's financially not viable just for one, but imagine maybe 4 or 6 depots spread across the state. We would have to staff them. You know, my friends in South Australia have 120 casuals on their books to staff 10 depots. We would need to procure land. Not buy, we'd probably lease. We need to have facilities on that land. You need a shed, you need a counting room, you need a tea room for your staff. You need bulk bins, and you need something to move those bins, forklifts, so you need people with forklift licenses. You need to fund all of this, so it needs to have a capital injection. And there is obviously a serious number of industrial risks that need to be managed. Currently, we feel that those risks can be managed, but it's a non-trivial exercise to set up as a business and run like that. For something like that to work, you've got to have a steady source of cans coming in. I talked before about people driving in with their, with a boot full of cans, a trailer full of cans, and that's certainly one part of it. There will be other people in the community who go around and collect cans in various ways from other people and bring them in as a sort of a mini business. We would need to effectively market to those people and convince them to come to our site. And sometimes that's just about having a good site and having it in the right location. Engaging with the local clubs and pubs to say, hey, all those cans and bottles that you're currently paying a waste company to take away, we'll take them away for you for nothing. Treat that as a donation to Scouts, or there might be a commercial relationship where we split the profit. But that's a well-established business model in other places. Similarly, major events to be able to go to, for example, the Myer Music Bowl, to some of their events, and sometimes just run on an event basis, sometimes rather than by the actual property. But again, to as a business, take over the recycling for that, collect those bottles and cans. At best, you pick up everything and you get the 10 cents plus the handling fee. At worst, you might have to split some of the 10 cents with the venue operator. But those are the sort of issues that we're facing into, and it's going to be a little hard to make some of those decisions. If I can go to the next slide. So going forward, I am running well for time. Going forward, we currently have a small amount of seed funding to have a staff member start to explore options with pubs and clubs, start to get the information to build the business case, start to engage with potential network operators, because there could be up to 6 network operators, And the network operators, in reality, have significant control over what happens. We're not controlled by the government as a refund collection point. It's up to the network operator. It's not up to the government to manage that. We are looking at what resources we have and what's available. Certainly Chris has made a comment in the chat line that we do have a number of properties, and we'll be looking at some of those. We are keen to make this a regional issue. The feedback from Western Australia and other places is that you can be very successful in this running depots not in the metro area. You find that it is less competitive because not too many other people want to set up a depot in a major regional town. The sense of community is quite often stronger because, as I said, you're competing. You're trying to get people to bring their cans and bottles to you. We've got some evidence that major regional centres are are a good place. I think the city is going to be overpopulated, and certainly initially, everybody thinks they're in the recycling business, and it will take a couple of years for that to sort itself out. So we are learning as much as we can from the operations in other states, both Scouts and non-Scouts, and our friends in Western Australia and South Australia and Queensland, who are the major, who've got positions, have been very, very good to us in terms of sharing quite intimate detail in terms of their financial. We will need to start to develop around the middle of this year business plans because we will be expected to support and negotiate positions with network operators prior to them putting in their bids to the government to become network operators. And later in the year, we will need to start developing group support material for those groups that want to collect cans in their own right and run from there. So that is the end of my presentation. Perhaps if we can drop the slides and I'll have a look back through the questions. I'll go right back to the start. So there's a question here from Sheridan Lofton. Bag type system, would you need to be sorted? Currently, and look, things are a bit fluid, but my understanding is no, the sorting and the counting would occur by the person who opens the bag, and that is the network operators. They'll be set up potentially even with automated machines to do the sorting and counting and run from there. We talked before about St Kilda, St Kilda South, 5th Mildura. I'm reading 5th to South, 5th Mildura, and the changes there. Some groups are on council land, is a comment here. That is obviously quite true. And that's one of the interesting challenges for ourselves and councils as to what will be the position of councils and what will be the planning issues around that. The state government has quite a number of people working on this. They don't want their recycling program to be derailed by overzealous councils strangling it because they want to get this up and running very quickly. At the same time, councils are responsible for planning and for the local environment. I think where if we just had 3 or 6 240-litre wheelie bins at the side of the Scout Hall, I don't think that's going to become a planning issue. But certainly if we start putting 10-foot containers and other things on our land, on council land or land we've leased, that's quite problematic. It's certainly recognised that a lot of our council leases really only extend sort of to a metre past the perimeter of the hall, so that's quite challenging and running from there. I did mention before the use of the land that we do own and control, and we'll be looking into that in detail. Belinda said, is it going to be possible for groups close to each other to share a depot? We imagine, first of all, just to make sure I understand the question, the depots would be run by Scouts Victoria. It's not viable for groups to run a depot. In effect, they will be a customer of the depot and bringing their cans and bottles to a depot. That depot may be a Scouts Vic depot. It may not be. There's no reason why a group couldn't take its cans or have its cans and bottles picked up by the local depot, which could be anybody, because the return to the Scout group is the same. You're going to get 10 cents per container. If you bring it to a Scouts depot, then you still get your 10 cents per container, but whoever owns the depot has the chance to make a small profit for their part for the handling fee. Certainly cooperation between local groups would make sense, and that would be a matter of running from there. So that's the questions I've got there. I'll open to any verbal questions or any more typed questions. It's been a quick run through, and trust me, it's taken 2 years to be able to condense the challenges and joys of container deposit down into those 4 or 5 slides. The language has been challenging. It's been a very fluid environment as the council, as the state government has tried to figure out whether it follows a model that's being used in Queensland or a model that's being used in New South Wales or an entirely different commercial model. There's been no shortage of interested bodies bringing in an opinion. Coca-Cola and Lion Nathan have a role to play in this, and they've been very keen to bring their opinion to it. They want it, but they want it to work in a certain way. It's been a long journey just to get it down to this level of simplicity. I've been talking a lot. Here's a question here. Seem only open for not-for-profits, correct? No, there's a strong encouragement from the government. The government wants not-for-profits to participate as much as possible. There's a number of organisations pushing the government to mandate a minimum level of engagement with not-for-profits, notionally around 30%. But anybody can collect cans, and everybody can take it back to a network operator. Anybody can set up a depot as a business if they like, but the network operators will be controlled by the government. They contract to the government, and they're certainly businesses because they're running fleets of trucks and forklifts, and they're also, once they've collected and managed all of these cans, they're typically crushing them down into big containers and then selling, those container loads of aluminium cans, for example, off to somebody who wants to melt them down and recycle them. So they're actually they are the link between recycling and link between collection and recycling. Who else is looking at this closely? Look, a lot of I sit on a couple of consultation groups with the state government. We think the surf lifesavers will take this pretty big. I'm sure it's got nothing to do with the fact that they churn through a few beer cans in a day. We're even seeing the football clubs, which is round ball and oval ball codes, are both pretty keen. We have seen smaller, more localised not-for-profits express an interest. In Western Australia, for example, there's a couple of refund collection points run by charities whose main purpose is to find employment for people who are challenged in finding employment. So they actually get a double whammy. They run this as a business. They're able to employ some of their clients, and they're able to turn a small profit as well after they have paid those people. So they have multiple objectives there. I believe we should be in a conversation with some of those charities to say, look, we might set up some depots, some refund collection points. Would they like to staff them? And so there's some double benefit to the community there as well. I'm just trying to quickly think who else has been turning up at these sorts of meetings. Footy codes. Yeah, the rest have been umbrella organisations. I think we will see, certainly towards the latter part of this year, there'll be a lot of interest as people think they can start a business in this regard. And this was the example. This is what happened in New South Wales. Within 18 months, a lot of people said, you know what, this is not worth it, because they ran small operations. It was all just got too hard. There wasn't the return in it, and yet they were handling a whole lot of small amount of cans. So like all of these things, there will be a bit of shakeout about 2 years. Now we're going there. We're at 11:17. We've still got 8 odd minutes left, so that's cool, probably a bit more. I'm happy. We will be running various consultations. We've already had one consultation with groups just to make sure we're on the right track. I would hope that off the back of this, anybody who has an interest or has an opinion to make, do not be afraid to call me up, write me an email. Most of this engagement is happening through me at the moment. It will spread out. There's a small strategy committee made up of people with business skills and some scouting skills as well to help certainly with the business case for the depots. But there will be further consultation out into groups, because if we're going to do this, we think groups, and experience from other states, the groups can, for very little input, make around 2.5, maybe as much as 5,000 a year, and run from there. So that's the interest in there. I'm just running through here a couple of questions. If SV ran depots, is there any role groups might play helping out at those depots to raise funds? Certainly, the challenge is it's an industrial environment. The OH&S is quite strict. So what we would see, that if SV ran depots, we would see groups bringing in their cans and bottles to those depots and managing it that way. But to staff them is quite problematic, because you need a routine. You need to be able to predict your staff, and you need to be able to train them and keep them safe. So that's the way I would see that working from there. My email address, greg.langren@vicscouts.com.au. If you go to the website, it's under the BEC, under the glowing picture of the chairman, you'll find my web address there as well. My email address is greg.landgren@vicscouts. Just going here, Belinda Dowell. So our hall is in an area with scouts, tennis, guides, football and cricket. This will be hard if everybody wants to do this. This is probably what my question was referring to. Apologies. No, that's right. Yes, that's Belinda. Yes, that will be interesting. I think certainly initially everybody will want to play. I think over time they'll discover it's hard, and you might find a rationalisation. It may be that you join together with those other clubs and societies and say, let's run a single thing here, and we will agree to split the profits. There's a number of ways through that. And it may make good sense just to have a single drop-off point so your community can support, scouts, tennis, guides, football and cricket all in one spot, and pre-arrange a profit split. So that may be one thing forward. Have other states had issues with people donating items other than recyclables? I think there's rubbish and dog poo. There will be, thank you, there's my web address, my email address. There is always a risk with any recycling about byproduct, people putting in things that aren't on the list. Wine bottles is the obvious example. So there is a certain amount of rubbish. You try and design the drop-off to minimise that. For example, you use chutes rather than an open bin. So you can do a number of ways to minimise that, but there will be that. In broad terms, most of that problem goes downstream to the refund collection point, because they have to sort and run from there. So they do have a waste problem. If we set this up right so that the whole bin or tray or whatever the bottles are in just gets picked up holus bolus by a truck and taken away, then that's taken out of the hands of scouts. Jim says, Belinda, I'd suggest talking to other groups and come to an arrangement. Yep, absolutely agree with that. And run from there. So we're starting to, oh, there's one new message. I was going to say we're starting to run out of steam, but no. Thanks, Jim. Okay. 3095 postcode. Where's 3095 postcode? Can scouts potentially initiate the production of the chutes as well? Yes. Yes, we believe that that's a key role. It may well be that we produce them. It may well be that the chutes and other things actually become the property of either the refund collection point or the network operator. They are also interested in creating that. When you think about life as a network operator or life as a depot manager, it's a logistics business. You want to get minimise your handling, maximise your profits. So common bins being run in a standard way becomes quite important. Our friends in South Australia actually have a mini factory where they generate bulk bins. Now these are sort of, bins the size of a dumpster kind of thing, so slightly bigger, but they are actually out there taking flat steel and building their own bins and shipping them all around the state and even to Queensland because they want a common handling, and they build chutes in on the top. So that's that sort of mid-size. If you go from the sort of 240 litre, large wheelie bins through those bins and then up to the bag drops kind of things. Some form of security is also important. Thank you, Stewie. In that, amazingly, there are people who will want to steal your empty cans so they can take them somewhere else and get a refund. So security becomes a little bit of an issue. I'll come back to wine bottles in a second. Mignon, this is basically about people getting a refund having paid up front. So when you buy a can of Coke, notionally the price of a can of Coke will go up to cover this. And so you've effectively paid 10 cents when you bought the can. You are getting your 10 cents back when you lodge your can for refund. That's why it's a refund, a recycling position. So glass jars would certainly be recycled, but they wouldn't be a refundable item. Just curious, why no wine bottles? The long and the short answer is that the wine industry has better PR companies than everybody else. The argument's been run nationally that this program is about waste outside the home. It's about rubbish and those sorts of things, and that wine is consumed in the home. And therefore, you don't need to worry about people throwing wine bottles into the bush. This is about encouraging people not to throw their cans on the side of the road. And that's why right since the first recycling was set up in South Australia, wine bottles have been excluded. You can argue whether they should be in or not. That's a lot of fun, but they have won that battle. The other thing is that once the majority of states in the country did not include wine bottles, Victoria pretty much had to follow suit. It's problematic for the wine industry to say, you know what, for wine bottles sold here in Victoria, first of all, we'd have a little label on the label which says, 10 cents refund back at point of purchase in a participating state, or whatever the label is, and then they'd have to change their pricing, their wholesale pricing as well. So consistency across the country becomes important, and it also stops our friends in Mildura from collecting wine bottles in one state and taking them across the border to the other. When would you suggest we start advertising to parents and friends to bring their recyclables to Scouts? Well, don't do it now. There'll certainly be plenty of advice. I think that's about 2023. This is about thinking and preparing and keeping you up to date with the work that we're doing. But the time to be telling your local community to bring their stuff to Scouts will be the moment you have a bin sitting at your hall and somewhere to put them. Certainly in conversations, if you want to tell people that Scouts is taking recycling in Victoria seriously, and we're looking to take a position in it, and we're working that through. Those are all things that I think are important. And Scouts, I think, are the original recyclers, going back many, many years. Part of this is about saying to the community, this is who we are. We have an environmental position. The fact that it also helps subsidise our operations is useful, and the two things come together. But we will provide a lot of material when it's time. And as I said, the last thing you want is bags of bottles and cans at your hall and not a bin to put them in. And there may be a problem that if you do it too early, technically those cans and bottles may not be available for refund. I think they may change the barcodes on the cans to be sort of refundable, not refundable. And some of the counting machines may reject them to say, no, this was bought prior to the refund scheme coming in. Districts and allocates groups to man them as such. Not sure there should be a lot of manning. I presume you're talking about depots, perhaps. manning them as a depot. That's possible. The challenge might be, as I said, it's an industrial environment. Kids running around where there's broken glass on the floor and all of that really freaks me out. People being run over by forklifts. I think the worst that's happened so far in South Australia is they run over somebody's foot with a forklift, but it is quite challenging. First Eltham used to have a bottle depot when we were at Council Hall. That's right, and historically, a lot of us did that a long time ago. Getting back to bottle drives, yeah, remember when there was just one type of beer bottle, and life was a lot simpler. It's bringing back a lot of memories as we talk about this with a lot of people, that it is a flashback to bottle drives. I still remember sitting in the back of a trailer. I think Jack Patterson, some of you might know Jack, used to drive the car, and we'd sit in the trailer and he'd drive us from house to house as we went and picked up bottles at 17th Essendon. I'm not sure we're doing that, but it is much closer to that model. I am running to the end of the question. Federal funding to get kids to learn to drive forklifts. Yep. Driving is an interesting challenge at the moment. Is it correct this scheme does not accept crushed cans? That's not correct at the moment. My understanding is that it will. I think the problem may be that some of the counting machines are challenged with crushed cans. The counting machines typically read a barcode and use that to sort. I think this is still being sorted out and will be sorted out at the tender phase in about the middle of this year. I think the scheme to not accept crushed cans would be a disaster. And they would not get the return rates. From a government's point of view, they want the maximum number of cans and bottles through the system, and reject rates would not help. In the 80s, we were raising $14,000 per annum from bottles. That is a lot of beer bottles. Bill Henley, how are you? Yes, yes. What do you plan to do with the extra income? I presume you're talking about the extra income from running the depots. I'm looking to either run Scouts Victoria or reduce the fees. Everything we do is about providing the best program and support to you guys for the lowest possible cost. If I can find a way to reduce that cost, then I'm happy. And of course, it's the same with all the other money that we use to help groups in terms of building and support and that sort of thing. So it would go into general revenue. Our local depot does not accept crushed cans as people apparently put stuff in them and they go by weight, not numbers. That's an interesting problem. As you start to understand the issue, the depot owners are buying the cans by unit, 10 cents a unit, and quite often selling them by weight. So you get this really interesting problem. For example, in South Australia, they don't want the plastic lids on the milk bottles for no other reason than it increases the weight. They'll tell you it's all about recycling and keeping it clean and not mixing plastics. In reality, my understanding is it's all about the weight. So yes, it's a little bit challenging with stories of people putting stones in cans and crushing them to try and boost the weight. But I think once you get into the volume business, it sorts itself out. I'm at 11:31. I'm now officially over time. Guys, I hope that's been useful to you. Just to bring you up to date on what we're doing and how we're doing. You'll see more of it. We'll be out there engaged with you, and give some thought as you're talking to your group committees and others across the year to say, gee whiz, is this something we might do? There's no action required at the moment, but just for your consideration. Thanks for your help. We'll talk to you soon.